By the beginning of the first millennium BC, Iranian-speaking tribes occupied lands stretching from the Zagros Mountains in the west to Central Asia in the east. Although they shared a common linguistic and cultural heritage, they remained divided into many independent communities. Among these peoples were the Medes. Living in the rugged mountains of western Iran, they occupied a strategic position between Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. For centuries, they remained largely unknown outside their homeland. Yet they would eventually emerge from the shadows of history to become one of the dominant powers of the Near East. Their rise would forever change the balance of power in the region and mark the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Iranian peoples. By the beginning of the 9th century BC, the most powerful state in the Near East was the Neo-Assyrian Empire. From their heartland in northern Mesopotamia, the Assyrian kings embarked upon a series of military campaigns that gradually transformed their kingdom into the largest empire the world had yet seen. Beyond Assyria's eastern frontier, rising above the Mesopotamian plains, the Zagros Mountains formed a vast and rugged landscape of narrow valleys, high mountain passes, and fertile plains. The region was divided among small kingdoms and tribal groups. Some paid tribute to Assyria, others resisted its expansion, while alliances shifted constantly as local rulers competed for influence. The Assyrian kings frequently campaigned into these mountains. Their objectives were conquest, the protection of trade routes, and the prevention of hostile coalitions from emerging along the empire's frontier. Year after year, Assyrian armies crossed the Zagros, sacking settlements and deporting thousands of people to Assyria. It is through the Assyrian royal inscriptions that the Medes first enter the historical record under the name Madai. These early sources do not describe a unified Median state. They portray the Medes as numerous local communities ruled by their own chiefs. The Assyrians record campaigns against individual rulers, the collection of tribute, and the establishment of provincial centers designed to strengthen imperial control over parts of the Zagros. The Assyrians frequently refer to the Median rulers as the city lords. Each appears to have exercised authority over a relatively small territory centered on one or more fortified settlements. Their power rested largely on their control of the mountain routes that connected Mesopotamia with the interior of the Iranian plateau. Although these rulers occasionally cooperated against common enemies, the surviving evidence suggests that Media remained politically fragmented throughout much of the 9th and 8th centuries. The landscape itself encouraged this political organization. As we mentioned, the Zagros Mountains are a complex network of valleys separated by steep ridges and high passes. Many communities lived in relative isolation from one another, and communication between neighboring valleys was often difficult. The economy of the early Medes reflected this environment. Most people relied upon a combination of agriculture and pastoralism. Wheat and barley were cultivated wherever fertile land was available, while sheep, goats, and cattle grazed across the surrounding hills. Horses also occupied an important place in Median society. The rich pastures of western Iran proved well suited to horse breeding, and Assyrian inscriptions frequently mention the collection of horses as tribute during campaigns into the Zagros. Trade also contributed to the prosperity of many Median communities. Important trade routes passed through the mountains, carrying metals, livestock, and other valuable goods across western Iran. It was these routes that repeatedly drew the attention of the Assyrian kings. Archaeology provides a valuable window into this world. Among the most important archaeological sites associated with the Medes is Nush-i Jan. Occupied during the late 8th and early 7th centuries BC, the settlement contained a massive mud brick fort, a columned hall, storage buildings, and what many archaeologists interpret as a temple. The careful planning of the site demonstrates that some Median communities had already developed sophisticated centers of administration. Nearby sites reinforce this picture. At Godin Tepe, archaeologists have uncovered substantial fortifications together with evidence of long-distance trade and specialized storage facilities. Further south, at Bābā Jān, excavations have revealed large buildings and impressive architectural remains dating to roughly the same period. For nearly 2 centuries, the balance of power in western Iran remained firmly in Assyria's favour. Whenever local rulers resisted, Assyrian armies crossed the mountains, devastated rebellious territories, and re-established their authority. Despite occasional uprisings, none of the Median chiefs possessed the strength to challenge the empire on equal terms. By the 7th century BC, however, cracks had begun to appear in Assyria's seemingly invincible empire. Decades of almost constant warfare had placed an enormous strain on its resources, while rebellions erupted in several parts of the empire. At the same time, the Babylonians sought to free themselves from Assyrian domination. It is during this turbulent period that the Assyrian sources first mention a Median leader named Kashtaritu. In the reign of Esarhaddon, he appears as the ruler of a region known as Karkashi and led a major revolt against Assyrian rule. Unlike earlier local uprisings, this rebellion attracted the support of several other peoples, including the Manaeans and the Cimmerians. Whether Kashtaritu ruled all of Media remains uncertain, and after the revolt, he disappears from the historical record. The final decades of the 7th century witnessed an even greater transformation. In 627 BC, the death of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal plunged the empire into a period of political instability. Rival claimants struggled for the throne, and many provinces seized the opportunity to revolt. For the first time in generations, the Assyrian Empire was vulnerable. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, it was during this period that a new Median ruler emerged, Cyaxares, known in Old Iranian as Uvashta, the Good Ruler. He describes Cyaxares as a capable military leader who unified the Medes and reorganized the Median army by separating its infantry, cavalry and archers into distinct units, replacing the older system in which all warriors fought together. Herodotus also records that the rise of Cyaxares was interrupted by the arrival of the nomadic Scythians. Following a major defeat, he claims that the Scythians dominated Media for 28 years before Cyaxares eventually overthrew them and restored Median independence. By the final years of the 7th century, the political landscape of the Near East had been transformed. Assyria was weakening, Babylon had risen in revolt, and the Medes, now unified under a king, had become the dominant power in the Zagros Mountains. In 626 BC, a Chaldean noble named Nabopolassar led a successful revolt against Assyrian rule and established himself as king of Babylon. After centuries of oppression, the Babylonians and the Medes were now ready to bring down the great Assyrian Empire. The first decisive blow came in 614 BC. According to the Babylonian Chronicle, the Medes advanced westward and captured and sacked the ancient Assyrian city of Ashur, the religious heart of the empire. Soon afterwards, Nabopolassar arrived with a Babylonian army. There, amid the ruins of the city, the two rulers are said to have met and concluded an alliance. 2 years later, in 612 BC, the allies launched their greatest campaign. Their target was Nineveh, the magnificent Assyrian capital. Protected by massive walls and defended by the remaining Assyrian army, the city was among the strongest fortresses of the ancient world. The siege lasted for several months, but in the summer of 612, Nineveh finally fell. The city was sacked, its palaces burned, its walls reduced to ruins, and many of its royal statues smashed and defaced. The Assyrian king Sin-shar-ishkun perished during the fighting, while the surviving Assyrian leadership fled westward in an attempt to continue the struggle. They established a new capital at Haran with the support of Egypt, whose rulers feared the growing power of both the Medes and the Babylonians. For 3 more years, the allies continued their campaigns across northern Mesopotamia. The final chapter of the conflict came in 609 BC, when Haran also fell to the allied armies. Although Egyptian forces attempted to restore the Assyrian kingdom, their efforts ultimately failed. Thus, Assyria was no more. The victory transformed the balance of power across the Near East. Babylon emerged as the dominant power in Mesopotamia, while the Medes extended their influence across much of the Iranian plateau. For the first time, an Iranian people stood among the great powers of the ancient world. Despite this remarkable achievement, the Median Empire remains one of the least understood states of the ancient world. According to Herodotus, Cyaxares continued to strengthen the empire after the fall of Assyria, and his authority reached into eastern Anatolia. It was here that the Medes came into conflict with another rising power, the Kingdom of Lydia. The war between the Medes and the Lydians lasted for several years before coming to an abrupt end. In 585, as the two armies met in battle, a total solar eclipse suddenly darkened the sky. Interpreting the event as a divine sign, both sides agreed to end the conflict and negotiate a peace. The agreement was sealed through a dynastic marriage, with the daughter of the Lydian king Aliatis marrying the Median prince Astyages, or Rishti-Vaiga, the lance herder. Although the surviving sources reveal little about his reign, they suggest that the Median state remained one of the principal powers of the Near East. The royal capital was Ekbatana, or Hagmatana, the place of gathering, identified with the modern city of Hamadan in western Iran. Herodotus famously describes it as a magnificent city surrounded by 7 concentric walls, each rising higher than the one before. Whether this description reflects historical reality or literary embellishment remains uncertain. Unfortunately, because the ancient city lies beneath the modern one, archaeologists have been able to investigate only a fraction of the Median capital. One additional monument that is traditionally associated with the Medes is a rock-cut tomb in the region of Iraqi Kurdistan. Carved high onto a limestone cliff, its monumental facade resembles the royal tombs later built by the Achaemenid kings. Although both its exact date and the identity of the person buried there remain debated, it is widely regarded as one of the most important surviving Median monuments. The Median Empire continues to frustrate archaeologists. Unlike the Assyrians or the later Persians, the Medes left behind no royal inscriptions, no extensive administrative archives, and very few monuments that can be identified with certainty. Even the sequence of the Median kings remains uncertain. Herodotus presents a line of rulers beginning with Deikes, followed by Phraaortis, Cyaxares, and Astyages. While Cyaxares and Astyages are supported by contemporary sources, the earlier kings are known only from Herodotus, and their historical roles continued to be debated by modern scholars. Thus, an important question arises: did the Medes truly rule an empire? For more than 2,000 years, the answer seemed obvious. According to Herodotus, the Medes established a vast centralized empire stretching from eastern Anatolia to Central Asia. During the last few decades, however, many historians have begun to question this traditional picture. Although there is no doubt that the Medes emerged as one of the great powers following the destruction of Assyria, the contemporary evidence for a centralized Median empire is surprisingly limited. As we mentioned, the Medes left behind no royal inscriptions or monumental building projects that can be securely connected to a centralized state. Likewise, Babylonian records mention the Medes as an important political power, but provide little indication that they governed the enormous empire described by Herodotus. This has given rise to what modern historians often call the Median dilemma. Were the Medes the rulers of a vast territorial empire, or were they instead the leading power within a loose confederation of kingdoms and tribal groups that recognized the authority of the Median king while retaining a large degree of independence? There is currently no consensus. Some scholars continue to defend the traditional view, arguing that the scarcity of evidence is simply the result of poor archaeological preservation and the complete absence of Median written records. Others suggest that Herodotus, writing more than a century after these events, projected the highly centralized structure of the late Persian Empire back onto the Medes. Although the Medes left behind no written account of their own, their influence shaped the course of history, and from the foundations they laid, one of the greatest empires the ancient world had ever seen was about to emerge.